The sound of breaking glass shattered the morning chatter in the cafe. A tray of steaming coffee cups lay scattered on the floor, liquid pooling around the shards. At the center of it all, a pregnant waitress stood frozen, her hands trembling. Murmurs spread through the room. "Seriously?" A man at a nearby table scoffed. "Is it that hard to carry a tray?" A woman chuckled. "Maybe she shouldn't be working like that. It's pathetic." Heat crept up the waitress's neck. Her eyes stung, but she refused to cry. She bent down, trying to clean up the mess. Then a chair scraped against the floor. A man in the corner stood up. And what happened next left the entire cafe in stunned silence. Have you ever seen someone stand up for a stranger? Share your story in the comments. Stay with me, because this story is about to take an unforgettable turn. The cafe was packed, the morning rush in full swing. The air smelled of fresh coffee and warm pastries, and the hum of conversations blended with the clinking of plates. Behind the counter, the waitstaff hurried back and forth, juggling orders and impatient customers. But among them, one waitress stood out. Her name was Sarah. She was in her late 20s, visibly pregnant, her apron stretched over her growing belly. Exhaustion clung to her features, but she kept moving. She didn't have the luxury of slowing down, not when rent was due, not when she had a baby on the way. Balancing a tray stacked with coffee cups, Sarah moved carefully through the cafe. Her feet ached, her back screamed in protest, but she ignored the pain. She had dealt with rude customers before, but today felt worse. They were staring, whispering, judging. A table near the window had been particularly cruel. 3 well-dressed customers, a man in a suit, a woman in expensive sunglasses, and another woman scrolling through her phone, had made their opinions very clear. "She's moving so slow." The man rolled his eyes. "I don't know why they even let her work in this condition." The woman sighed dramatically, stirring her coffee. The other woman chuckled. "It's embarrassing. What if she goes into labor right here?" They laughed at their own joke. Sarah heard it. She heard all of it. But she said nothing. She just kept working, because what else could she do? Then it happened. As she approached a table with 4 hot coffees, her foot caught the edge of a chair. Her balance wavered. The tray tipped. Before she could stop it, crash. Cups hit the floor, shattering instantly. Hot coffee splashed across the tiles. The cafe went silent. For a split second, no one moved. Then, the man from the table scoffed loudly. "Seriously?" he sneered. "Is it that hard to carry a tray?" The woman in sunglasses shook her head. "She's too pregnant to be working. This is ridiculous." The other woman let out a small laugh. Maybe, if she wasn't waddling around, she wouldn't be so clumsy. More whispers, more judgment. Sarah's hands trembled as she bent down, trying to clean up the mess as fast as possible. Her face burned with humiliation. And then, a chair scraped against the floor. A man in the corner of the cafe stood up. He had been sitting quietly, observing everything, and now he had seen enough. What happened next left the entire cafe in stunned silence. The cafe fell into an uncomfortable silence as the man rose from his chair. He was tall, well-dressed, but not flashy. There was something about him, a quiet authority that made people take notice. He moved slowly and deliberately toward Sarah, where she knelt on the floor, desperately trying to clean the spilled coffee with trembling hands. Then, without a word, he crouched down beside her and started helping. Gasps rippled through the cafe. The entitled customers at the window table stared, bewildered. The man in the suit scoffed. "What is he doing?" One of the women muttered. "He's seriously going to help her." Why? Sarah's breath caught in her throat. No one had ever done this before. She blinked, confused. You have to do that, sir," she whispered, barely able to speak. The man simply smiled. "But I want to." His voice was calm, steady, kind, and that's when everything shifted. A few other customers suddenly felt uncomfortable. A mother sitting with her young daughter whispered, "See? That's what kindness looks like." A college student near the counter muttered, "I should have helped too." Even the cashier behind the counter looked guilty for just standing there. But the man in the suit? He just sneered. "This is ridiculous." He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and decided to push further. "Let me guess," the man in the suit said loudly, smirking. "You think helping her makes you some kind of hero?" The woman in sunglasses laughed. "Or maybe he just has a thing for sad charity cases." The second woman snickered. "I mean, she's pregnant and working tables? That's not our fault." They laughed again, but this time, no one else joined in. The energy in the cafe had shifted, and the man kneeling next to Sarah? He slowly stood up. The way he looked at them, steady, unwavering, unafraid, made the entire table go quiet. "You're right about one thing," he said, voice level. "Her situation isn't your fault, but your behavior, that's on you." The woman in sunglasses rolled her eyes. "Oh, please, she messed up. We're just saying what everyone's thinking." The man tilted his head slightly. "Is that so?" Then he pulled out his wallet. What happened next? No one saw it coming. He reached into the wallet and pulled out a thick envelope. Without hesitation, he placed it on the counter in front of Sarah. Sarah frowned. "What is this?" "A fresh start," the man said simply. "You don't have to stay here anymore." Gasps spread through the cafe. Sarah's hands shook as she hesitated before picking up the envelope. When she opened it, her breath hitched. Inside was a check, with more money than she had ever seen in her life. "Wait, what?" The man in the suit leaned forward, squinting. "Who even are you?" Before the mysterious man could answer, a voice near the door gasped. "Oh, my God," a young woman whispered. "That's insert name. The CEO of major company." A collective wave of shock washed over the room. The rude customers went pale. The same man they had mocked just minutes ago wasn't just another customer. He was powerful, respected, wealthy beyond anything they could imagine. And yet, he had chosen to stand up for the pregnant waitress they had humiliated. Sarah couldn't breathe. She clutched the check, her eyes wide with disbelief. I can't accept this," she stammered. The man smiled. "Yes, you can." Tears welled up in her eyes. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. Truly seen. The cafe remained silent. And the rich, entitled customers? They finally understood what humiliation felt like. But this time, no one rushed to defend them. Sarah stared at the check in her hands, her breath shallow, her fingers trembling. This had to be a mistake, a dream. Never in her life had anyone shown her such kindness. "Sir, I can't take this," she stammered, her voice cracking. The man, the CEO, simply smiled, his eyes warm. "Yes, you can." His words were steady, unwavering. "You've worked hard enough. It's time someone worked for you." The cafe remained silent. Everyone was still processing what had just happened. Sarah, the waitress they had ignored, judged, and laughed at, was now holding more money than most of them had ever seen. And the people who mocked her? They had been put in their place in the most poetic way possible. The man in the suit, who had been so smug, so arrogant just moments ago, now looked sick. His face had lost its color. The woman in sunglasses shifted uncomfortably, her fingers gripping her coffee cup. For once, she had nothing to say. The second woman, who had joked about Sarah waddling, cleared her throat and forced a weak smile. I mean, we were just joking, she muttered. The CEO's eyes darkened slightly. No, you weren't, he replied, his voice calm but firm. You weren't joking. You were cruel. A heavy silence settled over the cafe. A few customers who had laughed along lowered their heads in shame because they knew they hadn't spoken up. They had watched as Sarah was humiliated, and they had done nothing. And now they felt just as guilty. Sarah, still overwhelmed, looked at the CEO with tear-filled eyes. "Why me?" she whispered. The CEO studied her for a long moment before answering. "Because I know what it feels like to be underestimated." He smiled softly. "And because the world needs more people like you, not them." He gestured slightly toward the entitled customers, who visibly flinched. They knew the truth. They had spent their lives believing money made them powerful. But today, they had been shown what real power looked like, and it had nothing to do with wealth. The CEO turned back to Sarah. "Take the money," he said. "Do something incredible with it. Give your baby the life you deserve." Sarah let out a shaky breath. For the first time in a long time, she felt hope. Real, tangible hope. And as she clutched the check to her chest, she realized something. She wasn't just some pregnant waitress. She was so much more. And now, she had a future. A soft, hesitant sound broke through the silence. Applause. One person, then another, until suddenly the entire cafe was clapping. For Sarah, for the CEO, for the lesson they had all just learned. The rich customers sat frozen in their seats. For the first time, they weren't the center of attention. They weren't admired or respected. They were pitied. And the worst part, they knew they deserved it. Sarah wiped at her eyes, her emotions overwhelming. The CEO smiled again, then reached into his pocket one last time. He pulled out a business card and placed it in front of her. "If you ever want a real job, call me," he said. Sarah let out a soft laugh, this time full of gratitude instead of exhaustion. "Thank you," she whispered. "For everything." The CEO nodded once. "Take care of yourself, Sarah." Then, without another word, he turned and walked out. And just like that, her life was never the same again. As the cafe's door swung shut behind the CEO, Sarah sat there, still gripping the check and business card, unable to move. The entire room had changed. A few minutes ago, she had been nothing more than the pregnant waitress, exhausted, invisible, struggling to get through another shift. Now, she was the woman who had been given a second chance, a future, a fresh start. Everything had changed in an instant. The entitled customers no longer looked smug. The man in the suit stared at his coffee, stirring it mindlessly as if willing himself to disappear. The woman in sunglasses kept adjusting them, trying to hide the embarrassment on her face. The second woman, who had laughed the loudest, hadn't touched her food. For the first time in their lives, they weren't the ones looking down on someone else. They were the ones being judged. And it felt horrible. Across the cafe, customers whispered. A mother leaned down to her young daughter and smiled. "You see, sweetheart, that's why we always treat people with kindness." A man who had laughed along earlier rubbed his face in shame. He glanced at Sarah and muttered, "I should have helped too." The guilt spread like wildfire. The moment played over and over again in their minds. They had watched, they had laughed, they had done nothing, and now they couldn't take it back. Sarah's co-workers approached her, still in shock. One of them, Lisa, kneeled beside her. "Sarah, are you okay?" Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "I don't know." She glanced down at the check again. This was real. It wasn't a prank. She wasn't dreaming. Someone had believed in her. And for the first time in a long time, she believed in herself, too. By the time her shift ended, The atmosphere in the cafe was entirely different. People who had ignored her now offered her warm smiles. A few customers left bigger tips than usual, and the rich customers, they left as quickly as possible, their heads down, avoiding eye contact. For them, this would be a day they'd never forget, but for all the wrong reasons, they had learned something today. Money doesn't buy class, and humility always wins. Days passed, then weeks. Sarah's life began to change. She used part of the money to get a small apartment, a place to finally call her own. She left the cafe job behind. And one day, after staring at the CEO's business card for hours, she finally made the call. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered. "Sarah, I was wondering when I'd hear from you." She swallowed, nervous but hopeful. "Your offer, does it still stand?" The CEO chuckled. "Of course. When can you start?" Tears welled in Sarah's eyes. Her fresh start had officially begun. The world didn't change overnight. Not everyone learned their lesson. But something in that small cafe had shifted. People became more aware. They spoke up more. And one waitress, once overlooked, once humiliated, became proof that one act of kindness could change everything. Months passed, but Sarah still thought about that day in the cafe, the day her life changed forever. She wasn't serving coffee anymore. She wasn't being mocked by customers who saw her as nothing more than a struggling waitress. She was working at an office, learning new skills, growing, thriving. She had a steady paycheck, maternity leave, and security for her baby. For the first time in a long time, she felt safe. She felt free. One afternoon, she sat at her desk organizing documents when her phone buzzed. A reminder. Her final paycheck from the cafe had arrived. She didn't need it anymore. Not like she used to. So she did something no one expected. She walked into the cafe one last time. The familiar scent of coffee and pastries filled the air, bringing back memories of exhaustion, frustration, and that one moment of kindness that changed everything. Some of her old co-workers were still there. Lisa gasped when she saw her. "Sarah, look at you!" Sarah smiled. "I wanted to see you guys. And I wanted to do something." She reached into her purse, pulling out an envelope. Lisa frowned. "What's this?" Sarah pressed it into her hands. "A tip for everyone." Lisa's eyes widened. "Sarah, this is enough to cover a month's worth of groceries. Enough to make a difference." Sarah smiled. "Someone helped me when I needed it the most. Now it's my turn." As she walked toward the door, she heard a familiar voice. "Wait." She turned. It was him, the man who had changed her life, the CEO, sitting at a corner table, sipping coffee, waiting, watching. He smiled knowingly. "I had a feeling you'd do something like this." Sarah shook her head, still in awe. "I learned from the best." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Tell me everything. How's the baby? How's the new job?" Sarah sat down, feeling grateful beyond words, because she finally understood something. True kindness never stops. It grows, multiplies, spreads, and sometimes one act of kindness is all it takes to change the world. Sarah's story wasn't just about a struggling waitress. It was about resilience, about dignity, about how one act of kindness can change everything. She walked into that cafe expecting another hard day. She walked out with a future, a new beginning. But the truth, this could happen to anyone. Because every day, in every city, there's someone like Sarah, struggling, unseen, underestimated. And every day, there's a chance to be the person who changes their life. The CEO didn't have to help. He could have ignored the rude customers. But he stood up. And because of that, an entire room learned what true kindness looks like. And now, so have you. Have you ever seen someone step in to defend a stranger? What would you have done in this situation? Let us know in the comments. If you believe kindness matters, hit that like button and share this video to spread the message. And don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this, because sometimes one decision changes everything. See you in the next video.